Let me start off by saying I have said various times on the floor that there is a fierce urgency of now. And so our efforts to bring directly to the floor the lifting of the liability cap is because we see that every day in the Gulf region. We see that in the despair of residents of the Gulf region whose lives and livelihoods are being affected every day. And we see it as information becomes more crystallized and real, where in fact the new rate of spill that has been determined has to be put in context. You know, Exxon Valdez, that was the worst oil spill, was 11 million gallons. Well, based upon the government's own assertion today, this spill is anywhere between 17 and 28 million gallons of oil that have spilled into the Gulf, which would mean twice the size already of the Exxon Valdez spill. So I think it just continues to make, as the science and the facts become clearer, it continues to make the case for the fierce urgency of now. And if it wasn't made clear by many of the oil spills of the past, if it wasn't made clear by last year's disastrous spill in Australia, which you know, the Mineral Management Services didn't really poo-poo to something that couldn't happen, then the Deepwater Horizon disaster has made it clear to everybody that there is simply no such thing as an oil rig that is too safe to spill. So what does it mean as we move forward as it relates to how we deal with liability for those who will be affected? And unquestionably, if we look at the experience of what happened in Alaska with the Valdez spill and how decades later there were still consequences, and this spill is twice the size of that spill, then we can understand the nature of the consequences moving forward. I think one of the first takeaways is that because thousands of rigs currently operating along the Gulf Coast aren't going away anytime soon, we have to make sure that anyone who has their livelihood damaged by an oil spill, current or future, will be fully reimbursed by the company that is responsible. The second takeaway is that instead of exposing even more coastal communities to risk by expanding coastline drilling, we need to hit the stop button and really put some muscle behind the transition from 19th century fossil fuels to clean, limitless 21st century energy sources. To the first point, we will never ensure that coastal economies are fully protected from man-made disasters until we ensure that responsible companies are fully on the hook. And you know, while right now we are looking to make those shrimp fishermen, commercial fishermen, seafood processing, coastal communities, hotels, restaurants, tourism, that are all going to be affected in a negative way by the spill, we want to make them whole by making the company responsible. Lifting the cap to unlimited liability also creates a sense of discipline on those companies to think about what they do before they do it. But if the cost of doing business is this sliver, $75 million, when you are making $94 million each day, so less than one day's costs, then you know what? If that's the cost of doing business and I'm not responsible and I want to cut the edges and cut the corners and make the money, and at the end of the day I have a bad spill and that's what it costs me in terms of liability, I'll still make a big profit. Until we change that as well as part of the calculation on drilling, we're never going to ultimately have a set of circumstances in which drilling, to the extent that it's going to be done, will be safe. So we need to make absolutely certain that big oil polluters pay for their oil spills, not the taxpayers of this country, not a bailout for the oil industry, not fishermen, none of these other entities. And so we're going to continue making every attempt to get rid of the ridiculous $75 million limit on oil company liability. You've seen us try multiple times to get unanimous consent of our colleagues to make this happen. We're going to keep pursuing that, hoping that at some point the ones who object will come to the realization that oil companies should not be protected from accountability. Not now and not ever. We also have an amendment to the supplemental that I've offered to get rid of the cap. If we can get agreement from our colleagues to waive procedural objections, we could make it the law as part of this supplemental bill that we are debating on right now. Now, this week, the administration clarified its position to say it will support unlimited liability for damages caused by future spills in deep water, and we think that's an incredibly important step. And slowly but surely, more and more are understanding the ridiculousness of the claims that some have made that it is, quote, as Rand Paul and others have said, un-American to hold a multi-billion-dollar foreign corporation accountable for the disaster it caused. I think it's un-American not to hold them responsible. This is a chance to show if we stand with big oil companies or with the small business, fisheries, and coastal communities. There should be no legal wiggle room for oil companies that devastate coastal businesses, communities, and our environment collectively now or in the future. This could also be a milestone day for everyone who believes that it would be foolish to exacerbate the risks of coastline drilling by expanding it to new areas. It is reported that President Obama will announce today an extended moratorium for deep-sea drilling and will cancel the Virginia drilling lease, which includes areas less than 100 miles from the Jersey shore. I eagerly await the details of this announcement, but I'll say that if it is accurate, it would deserve our applause. It would be a decision rooted not in the myths about drilling safety that oil companies have perpetrated for years, but in the reality that has been exposed by the gusher in the Gulf. I certainly know it would elicit a sigh of relief in my home state of New Jersey, where not only does every family view and cherish the Jersey Shore as a birthright, but many families rely on it as a way to make ends meet. Hitting the stop button on Virginia drilling ought to be the first in a series of decisions that ultimately take us to a new outlook on energy. This shouldn't be a case in which we just wait for another disaster, for a disaster to recede from our memory, then go back to our old ways. This should be a moment in which we fully realize the folly of our old ways and we look forward and not back. Finally, I'll just simply say we are, in one respect, making progress. On the floor yesterday, Senator Vitter, supported by Senator Murkowski, who has objected to our unanimous consent request to lift the liability cap, actually said that as it relates to this incident in the Gulf, that they believe that BP should be subject to unlimited liability. Well, the proposition is right. The only problem is that it's not just that BP should be subjected to unlimited liability because they and others who are the polluters should pay. It should be that anyone who creates the type of disaster that has been created in the Gulf anytime in the future should be subject to unlimited liability. They are moving in the right direction. I just hope that they join us now because there is a fierce urgency of now.